Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Thought for the Week, which I'm recording on yet another gloriously sunny day in Chamonix Green. I'm sitting indoors to do this because it's simply too hot to be sitting outdoors at the moment, which is not a problem we face very often. I'd like to start with a question. What do you hope the world will be like after coronavirus? Obviously, at the moment, we're still very much in the midst of it all, albeit with some easing of the lockdown restrictions over the last week or so. We've all experienced the last few weeks in very different ways, haven't we? Depending on our circumstances and, of course, our health and the health of our families. But I know for some people, it's been a really difficult time. Alongside the challenges of lockdown, I hope that many of us have also been able to enjoy some unexpected blessings during this season, whether that's more family time, fresh air and exercise, or simply being able to embrace a slower pace of life. For me personally and for our family, we've loved having more time together and being able to get outdoors a bit more than we'd normally be able to. But with two very active boys in the house, it's certainly not been a time for slowing down, unfortunately. Whatever our current experience is, for all of us, life has taken a very unexpected turn. And of course, that's true for every single one of us right across the world. 2020 isn't turning out as any of us could have predicted. For all of us, our day-to-day lives have shrunk, haven't they? Many of us are, or most of us are not travelling really any further than the supermarket. Perhaps not even there, perhaps just to the end of our driveways or the end of the road. But can we take this opportunity to turn our thoughts outwards, beyond our own immediate circumstances and those of our community? While we certainly mustn't minimise the difficulties that we ourselves and those around us are facing in this time, I'm sure many of us are very conscious that for many people in other parts of the world, the challenges are even more severe. For those who were struggling before coronavirus, life is even more difficult now. You might have heard it said in recent weeks, we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. Across the world, millions of people are living in conditions where social distancing of any sort simply is not possible. They're also facing poor healthcare or none at all, poor sanitation, no access to any sort of schooling, mounting debt and hunger. A colleague from a Tier Fund partner said this in a recent communication. They're based in India. My biggest worry is the millions of poor people who do not have the means to protect themselves, or work from home, or wash their hands, or get their salary at the end of the month. And for some, the fear of hunger caused by this situation is actually of far more concern than the virus itself. As is sadly often the case, both here in the UK and elsewhere, it's the poorest and most vulnerable who are most at risk from this virus. Those who were already vulnerable are now finding themselves in an even more precarious position. But at the same time, there have been some real positives coming out of this situation, haven't there? At Tier Fund, where I work, we're hearing stories from all around the world of people, often Christians, finding ways to reach out to their communities and meet their needs. In many countries, churches have been a key part of the national response to the coronavirus outbreak. That's particularly true in a lot of African countries, including South Africa, where the church has been able to bring a lot of influence to bear on the government in shaping the government's response. That's amazing, isn't it? Here in the UK, more people are connecting with church and with God than ever before. Some recent research found that over a third of young adults aged between 18 and 34 have joined some sort of online church service since the lockdown measures began, many of whom have never set foot actually inside a church. Online alpha courses have begun to spring up all over the place and are proving to be really popular. For many, this seems to be a moment of real spiritual awakening. Communities are coming together like never before, and people are getting to know their neighbours, often for the first time, despite the need to be physically distant from each other. We're travelling less and we're buying less. People are enjoying breathing cleaner air and spending more time outdoors. In China, it's thought that the reduction in air pollution during the lockdown has actually saved the lives of more people than have died in China during the virus. I think we're seeing some of our values shift too, perhaps more in line with the values of God's kingdom. The pandemic has made us realise how deeply connected we are to each other and to the wider creation, and how much we need each other. It's brought forth acts of great courage and selflessness. And all of us, to some extent, have made sacrifices over the last few weeks to protect other people. It's prompted us to reevaluate what matters, and perhaps even to reimagine what life could be like. Which brings me back to my opening question. What do you hope the world will look like in the future? At Tearfund, we've been doing a lot of thinking about that question and how this crisis has the potential to shape the world for the better. I'm sure that's crossed many of your minds too. Many people are realising that we don't have to go back to the way things were. In fact, a recent survey found that only 9% of Britons actually want life to go back to what we previously thought of as normal. That's quite telling, isn't it? Just 3 weeks ago, we commemorated the 75th anniversary of VE Day. And history tells us that the aftermath of the war was a time that saw great social transformation, not least the creation of the NHS, which we're all so thankful for today. What if this situation that we find ourselves in, that none of us would have chosen, is another once-in-a-generation opportunity to shape a better future? One that is fairer and more environmentally sustainable. One where we value everyone and where we live as though our decisions affect other people. There's a lot of rebuilding to be done in the months and probably years to come, and only time will tell what direction that rebuilding takes us in. But we have the opportunity to do that in a way that protects the vulnerable, tackles climate change, and reduces the inequality that we so often easily ignore, but which this pandemic has really brought to light. That might sound a bit pie in the sky, or we may feel that most of it's out of our hands anyway. There's obviously no guarantee that we don't just go back to how things were, or even go in an even worse direction. But we do have a role to play in shaping the world we want to see. And I think as Christians, we have a particularly important role through the way we live, the values we live by, and also by calling for change. Throughout history, Christians have been central at moments of social renewal, from the abolition of the slave trade to the civil rights struggle. What if this is another one of those moments where we're called to step up? At the risk of turning this into a Tearfund sales pitch, I'd love to highlight some resources that we've produced that explore these issues in a bit more detail and give you some ways to respond if you'd like to. There's a short video, which hopefully you're going to see in just a minute, and a discussion guide to help small groups explore their own experiences of the pandemic and explore and consider their role in building a better world. We used it in our online home group a couple of weeks ago and really enjoyed discussing the questions and sharing our thoughts and experiences and our ideas. There's also a slightly longer paper called The World Rebooted for those who want to delve into the issues in a bit more detail. And you can find all of these at tearfund.org/reboot. You'll also find an action you can take if you'd like to. sending an email, or better still, a letter to the Prime Minister, calling on the government to consider the poorest and most vulnerable and also the environment in the decisions they make about how we rebuild and move forward from this crisis. Time and again in our campaigning work, we've seen that when lots of people raise their voices together, it does make a difference. So I'd really urge you to get behind this campaign if you possibly can, and to share it with other people. And it's been lovely to hear from a few of you in the last week that you've already done that and you've already taken action as part of this campaign. Everything you need is on the website I just mentioned, tearfund.org/reboot. And I'd love to hear what you think about the resources that are on there. So I'm going to leave you now with the video I mentioned. It's just 2.5 minutes long, but it goes into some of the things I've touched on in a little bit more detail. If you enjoy it and find it interesting and inspiring, then please do grab some friends or your home group online and have a watch together and discuss some of the questions. And again, I'd really love to hear what you think about it and what sort of thoughts and ideas it prompts for you. Thanks for watching, keep well, and I hope you have a really good day.
COVID-19 has shone a light on how unequal our world really is. For many people around the world, lockdowns have meant cramped living conditions, loss of jobs, increasing debt, and days without food. And it's reminded us of how we've damaged God's creation. Air pollution has made people more vulnerable, and our destruction of nature has made it more likely for diseases to jump species. But as we've journeyed through this crisis, 3 big positive shifts in society have also started to happen. The first is a shift away from individualism. We lived side by side, but separate from each other. Now we found greater togetherness. Even though we're physically distanced, we're coming together as communities. Local communities are supporting each other in WhatsApp groups and mutual aid, and we've seen how thousands of key workers bravely hold our society together. The second shift has been valuing life more than productivity. So often our value has been defined by what we have or how productive we are. But now dignity of life for everyone is top of the agenda. So much of the economy has been put on pause to protect people's health. People who are homeless have been housed, and millions of us are giving our time and resources to support the most vulnerable. And lastly, there's a shift towards greater imagination. In a poll during April, only 9% of Britons wanted life to return to normal after lockdown. We're discovering how much is possible. We've built new hospitals in days. We've seen unprecedented government support and a world change overnight. Now more than ever, people are hoping that the world really will change for the better. But this change is not guaranteed to last. If we don't act, we could easily fall back to the old normal. Or we could go in a worse direction, where the lockdowns result in racism and division, inequality gets worse, and public money is used to bail out big polluting companies. But if we embrace these 3 big shifts, towards togetherness, life and imagination, we could see real change. The reboot of the economy could fast-track action on the climate emergency, protect the most vulnerable and reduce inequality. This just might be possible if we take action together. In his Easter sermon, Archbishop Justin Welby said, "After so much suffering, so much heroism from key workers and the NHS, we cannot be content to go back to what was before as if all is normal. There needs to be a resurrection of our common life. As the people of God, we can be a part of casting a vision for a way forward. How will you play your part?"